Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you and welcome to the latest in YouGov's webinar series on COVID-19. My name's Will Ulstein and I'm delighted to be joined today by our CEO of Mainland Europe, Bianca Brun, and our data products expert, Anne Everson. What we're going to take you through today is the latest data from YouGov's COVID-19 Consumer Monitor and our recovery tracker. That is going to be led by Bianca. Good morning, Bianca.
Good morning, Will, and good morning to everyone on the call. And thank you very much for joining us today. As Will said, I'm Bianca Brun. I'm responsible for YouGov's operations in mainland Europe, and really delighted to have the opportunity to present for you today. Thanks.
Fantastic. We're then going to move on once Bianca's delivered that insight, and we're going to turn it to our data products expert across mainland Europe, Anne Everson. She's going to walk us through YouGov's new connected data, especially in relation to our trackers. Good morning, Anne.
Good morning, Will, and good morning, everyone. Really looking forward to share some insights and how we do trackers the YouGov way with you all.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We'll then come on to questions and answers at the end. So just a little bit of housekeeping first, if I may. There is a chat function within Zoom here, and we are very keen to answer your questions and have left some time for them at the end. So please do use that chat function to send us your questions. That can be either broadcast publicly or the default setting is to only send those questions to those of us that are presenting. We are also recording this webinar. And a copy of these slides will be made available afterwards. So please don't feel as though you have to scribble endless notes. We will deliver this to you in one package at the end. Right, before I hand over to Bianca, I'd just like to walk through a very top line summary of YouGov's position right now. When the COVID-19 pandemic broke, our CEO made a very public statement about what YouGov's mission was for the foreseeable future, and that was to serve the public good. And what he means by that is giving everyone around the world the opportunity and the voice to contribute to the discussion and have their point of view heard. So with that, what we have done is thrown open the doors to YouGov with the likes of YouGov Chat, which is our new technology that allows anyone, whether they be a panelist or not, to engage with us on this topic. We've also been collecting data from around the world, packaging that up and delivering it to the experts at Imperial College London, who are one of the foremost world experts on epidemiology, and that data is then being delivered to public health organizations to really take the fight to COVID-19. It also means that that data, that behavioral data on health measures, is actually open source and is available in two formats. If you go to coviddatahub.com, there is dashboard forms powered by Tableau, or if you want to get really into the nuts of the data, nuts and bolts of the data, then it's available on GitHub as respondent level data. But that's so that's just a standpoint on where we are. Anne is going to move on and talk about our Cube trackers, or Cube connected trackers. At the center of YouGov's system is what we call the YouGov Cube. It is a massive data lake which connects all responses that we have collected on our panel and allows us to surface them, surface that data, surface insights in an extraordinarily powerful way, as Anne will be able to tell you through this. The way that we surface those two clients in the tracker world is through our syndicated products, so things like brand index, destination index, so where's popular and where people would like to go on holiday, whether that be sports index, looking at particular events or leagues, or whether that be about understanding your audiences through YouGov profiles. We also have a series of templated trackers that Anne will give examples of, but this is massively scalable and flexible solutions that allow you to customize what you're looking for to a certain degree, but also take benefit of our Cube data. And then there is our custom work. We know that many clients really value that, and what we do is we connect your custom work to our syndicated data to bring you even greater value. And what I've just described, I think, is best shown by this diagram here, in terms of we have data streams coming in on the left of all of those products that I've talked about, that sits and is integrated in the YouGov Cube and is then populated and disseminated through YouGov's reporting tools, whether they be dashboards, whether they be APIs and data exports, or something like Crunch, which is our powerful analytics platform. So if that's just setting out the agenda of what we're talking about today. But without further ado, we'll get into the detail of our COVID-19 data with an update from our mainland Europe CEO, Bianca Brun.
Thank you very much, Will. And we will jump right into it and ensure that we are all well equipped to navigate successfully through the next phase of the COVID-19 crisis. So just a very quick note about our methodology here. So we have a classic tracker model where we're collecting data on a weekly basis, actually in 27 countries. And we've done so since the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, where we started March 12th. And we're running 2,000 interviews per country in Germany and the UK, and 1,000 interviews per week in the rest of the countries. And for today's call, we'll look at those 10 waves of data that we have so far. So let's jump into that. Now, next slide here, we see that all countries are now relaxing restrictions and reopening the countries, and each country are applying a different approach. So Merkel has handed over the management and control around the reopening to the federal states, which means that you'll find very different restrictions and strategies around the German states. And in Germany, we've seen demonstrations in several cities. We're also starting to see this elsewhere, but where people are protesting against the restrictive measures. And we'll dive a bit further into the data to look more at this specific situation. Spain, France, and Italy, that have all been severely hit by the pandemic, are all relaxing restrictions now, even if we remain in the initial phases of the reopening in these countries, whereas we see with the Nordic countries, we're a bit further with the reopening phases. And it's, of course, important context to have as we dive into the data, given that the consumer behavior is inevitably impacted by the reopening strategies applied in the different countries. So first, let's look at the perception of the situation and the trust in the government. Always important to understand this overall state of mind of a given audience, which you're trying to communicate to. So if we look at this first slide, we're looking at the satisfaction with the government across the region. And as you can see, we experienced quite a turbulent picture in the beginning of the crisis, where we sort of from around March, beginning of April, we see a much more stable picture, which is of course interesting, as we are all experiencing right now very heated debates in all countries about appropriate opening strategies. But as you can see, it's not really impacting the overall trend line significantly, apart from a few countries that stand out. So most significantly, you see that the satisfaction with the British government is continuously declining. And also the satisfaction with the Italian and the Finnish governments are fading slightly. The French seem to be stable, and from the point of view that the French government's handling of the situation has stayed unpopular basically throughout the track period. And as mentioned earlier, we have all seen the images of protests, in particularly in Germany, against the restrictive measures. However, as you can see here, the dissatisfied group remains a minority in Germany, and it's not really impacting the trend line here. However, here we want to take the opportunity to dive further into the data and using our connected data platform to understand a bit more about this dissatisfied segment. So you see here is that 8% of the German population, or it is 8% of the German population that think that the German government is handling the corona crisis very badly, and 18% says fairly badly. So basically 26% dissatisfied with the government's handling of the crisis. And when we look at our connected data, we can see that these people are more often voters of the right-wing party, so Alternative für Deutschland, and they are less often voters of the government parties, so CDU and CSU, and they are also more often disinterested in politics in general, and a very high proportion of these people have generally got a rather pessimistic outlook, with 71% of the segments agreeing to the statement, the country is going to the dogs. So this demonstrates really how easy we can dive into the data and provide more context to a specific topic and ensure that the data becomes much more actionable for you. So now we take a look at the general perception of the situation, so the levels of concern given to the current situation. And as you can see, the Danes remain the more optimistic population, but we also see Italy almost at the same optimistic place like the Danes, actually, which is great to see. And Sweden, Finland and Norway continue to be somewhat conservative about the situation, with still sort of on average 30% saying that the COVID-19 situation in their country is actually getting worse. And now, having looked at this, is really time to sort of look at the recovery tracker, which would help us look forward a bit. So if we first look at the concerns, so we look at what people are most concerned about in relation to the current crisis. And you can see here that there is general agreement that the two biggest areas of concern are the global recession and the impact on local businesses. However, if we look at the bottom two concerns on this chart, these are more linked to people's own financial situation, and we see a much bigger difference in how much people fear not being able to pay their bills and not being able to pay their mortgages, and it's really ranging from one extreme being Spain, where we see very high concerns around ability to pay bills and pay the rent or mortgage, and then Denmark is the least concerned country. And it is, of course, important to pay attention to which state of mind in terms of fear you find your audience, and ensure that you communicate appropriately and thinking of this state of mind, which really leads us to look at the next slide, which is the household impact. And we see a massive difference by country in terms of percentage of people saying that they have reduced non-essential expenses. So this is a top piece of this bar. And especially Italy and Spain have higher percentages of the population that have reduced non-essential expenses, and also have been forced to draw on their savings to cover expenses. And also, as you can see, France, we see that actually half of the population have reduced their non-essential expenses. The difference between the countries are less significant when we look at the percentage of people saying that they have had to take on more debt to cover expenses, which is thankfully a relatively low percentage across all countries, with only Spain being above the 10% mark. But when we look at household impact, it is also always helpful to test what people would do if all of a sudden euros dropped from the sky. So we look at what people are most likely to do if they were to receive an unexpected windfall equivalent to a month household income. And we clearly see that for countries that have been more severely hit by the pandemic, people are more likely to save the additional money, and countries less impacted are more likely to spend it. And this leads us perfectly into looking at how consumers are behaving now, that we're sort of in this reopening phase. And if we take a look at the in-store spend, we see that the percentage of people saying that they are spending more in-store is growing both in Spain and in France, whereas Italians and Swedes are more likely to avoid in-store, as we see an increase of the percentage of Italians and Swedes saying that they are spending less in-store compared to 2 months ago. And if we look at the online spend on the next slide, we see that the online spend is also growing in France and Spain. So people are generally becoming more comfortable spending, whether it's online or in store. Swedes are also spending more online, so shifting their spend from in-store to online. And the Brits are also spending more online now compared to 2 months ago. And then it's of course interesting to look at whether people generally expect to shop online more in the future. And we can see this in the next slide, where we are examining people's outlook with respect to a number of things. So like online shopping, where you have it here, the bottom statement of this chart, where we see a large percentage of Italians expecting to make much more use of online shopping and online delivery as a result of the coronavirus. And we are also looking at the eagerness of different countries to go on vacation. And here you can see 56% of the Swedes say they can't wait to go on vacation. The Brits also quite high on this chart for longing to go on vacation. And if we look at people's attitudes towards the cashless society, we see clearly that COVID is accelerating the already existing trend, of course, to use less cash in the future. And for Spain, 55% of the people expect to use less cash in the future. And all countries are high on the commitment to support local businesses much more in the future. And this is indeed a trend to pay careful attention to in relation to campaign communication in general. And this slide provides us with a great opportunity to dive deeper into the data. And first we take a look at Spain, and we look at the Spanish people that are looking to use less cash in the future. Who are they? So we have an equal gender split, but these people tend to have a slightly higher income than the general population. And in the top boxes here, we just press on. Yes, thank you. You can see their interest in sports, their media consumption habits, and the brands they like. And we can see that they tend to use on-demand and streaming services more often than the general population. They are more interested in technology, and they care about their personal health. Now with this, we know so much more about the segment that we may wish to communicate to. And the data are all of a sudden a lot more actionable. Now we know exactly what to do with this particular segment. So we'll just look at another example, with for France here, and we saw before. We wish to understand more about this high proportion of French people who say that they will support local businesses much more in the future. And we see a slightly higher percentage of these people being women, but they are matching the income spread of the general population. And you can see here which brands they like, what social media channels that you would need to reach them on. And you can see dive into any other nuances about this specific audience to communicate with them in the best and most effective way possible, of course. So this is really the last slide, which is in summary what we've seen, that the more challenging the situation has been in a country around COVID, the more we see consumer behavior changing now. So really be alert to the changes. They're coming, we're seeing them, we can see them in the data. And also, there is definitely some trends across all countries in this recovery process that are worth to pay particular attention to. So the much higher support of local businesses, the use of less cash for payments, and indeed also the higher online spend and the commitment to buy more sustainable products. So there's a lot of things here to continue to pay attention to in your communication, in your priorities, in terms of going to market. So that's it from my side, and I will hand over to you, Anne.
Thanks a lot, Bianca. So now we've heard a bit about, trackers with a COVID-specific topic, and I'm going to continue with even more about trackers. So first question is, why are tracking so important? Well, organizations have to understand how they're doing over time. And at the same time, in themselves, trackings are not very interesting, because essentially you're just asking the same questions again and again over time. And furthermore, the data is by definition limited by the length of the interview. You can only ask so many questions. So what we're saying is that we have the ability to supplement the data in the relevant study with all the other data that we collect over time. And what we can do by linking the data is add different insights and different data over points of time without compromising the consistency of the tracking study itself. So I'm going to talk a bit more about our three approaches. You can go to the next slide. The first approach is our syndicated one. I'm going to show you how we can connect our data and how the connected data concept works through the use of brand index and profiles. Brand index is our flagship tracker. It's a fully off-the-shelf and quite generic tracker in the sense that it's the same across countries and categories. And at the same time, it's also connected to profiles. And these two elements form the major part of our cube. If you move on to the next slide, you can see that the volume that we get from these syndicated tools represent good value and gives breadth of understanding, really providing scalability to your tracker. So going on to the next, I'm going to show you more specific examples based on data that we are collecting as we speak. So this is an example of how connected data can give more clarity to current challenges in the market, meeting two demands, stay on top of the current development and looking forward to see a way out of the crisis. This is some data from Germany, and based on Adidas, H&M, Puma, and Deichmann, we saw that they, on the 27th of March, they went public saying that they will stop paying rent because their stores were being closed because of the coronavirus, and they couldn't see, any income going on. This resulted in buzz decreasing. Buzz is the metric that shows us whether consumers hear more negative or positive things about our brand. Even though we see that they apologized just a few days later and they paid rent for April and continued to pay rent, we also see that buzz continued to decrease. And especially for Adidas. The other brands were not nearly as much affected. So we need to understand why one brand takes the heat and why Adidas is then affected that much and how to recover from that crisis. So where do we go from here? We should go to look at on the impact of the other metrics. From experience, we know that buzz is the metric that reacts the most. It's a media metric. It reacts first and it reacts most to events in the market. But not all things that consumers hear also have equal effect on image or consideration. So this is where daily interviews and many metrics come into play. Image we can see has taken a hit. That is the top line. It's not as hard as the buzz is being hit, but we also see that the image is not fully recovered. It's actually not back to the level from before the crisis. And this could pose a problem for future development. So what's in store for Adidas? Now we should begin to look for information that could actually help decide on a strategy to recover, for instance. So let's first look at more at the data that we already have. We have 16 metrics in brand index. We cover everything from awareness to image and all the way down to the lower levels of marketing funnel. And we can see that impression, which is the top line. It's the image metric, which receives the highest scores normally, but it also is the one that is affected the most. So we need to understand how, when, and what to do to communicate to our audiences, and that's why we need to know more about the different audiences. So how do we decide which audience to approach, and which one is the most relevant ones to look into? So what you could do is, if you go to the next slide, yeah, you can look into the data. You could sort the data using the engagement level as the defining metric. We know that impression is decreasing. We know that we have consumers or customers, and we don't want to lose these customers. So what I'm suggesting here is that we look at the market, at the audience that we need to protect, the current customers who also have a positive impression of us. These are the ones we want to protect our market share. So let's look into this. What we see on the next slide is how the impression is actually dropping also among the Adidas current customers. So, and it's not yet recovered even. So it does seem important to look into these, this group of people. So the only way you can know more about them is to append more data to these brand index results. We could add a few questions, extra questions to brand index and then collect that. But I want to start by connecting the data that we are already available instead. And that way we can save the extra questions for later, which is also one of the things that is happening through the connected data. So what we can see here is that those who are current customers of Adidas and have a positive impressions, they are more males, but the female portion is part of the population is also represented. It's a bit more adult family. They might have a bit more time for being active, which we can see they are. They are also very interested in sports in general, but especially football has their heart. They are FC Bayern München fans, and they are really interested in different football leagues. They see themselves as team players, which also fits with their interests in sport, I would say. And they have these bucket lists that are concerned towards, you know, your health, being outdoors, having ambitions on what you can do with your body, etc. And they do not like to be alone. Knowing all this will make it easier for Adidas to communicate, to send out relevant communication, and to the time where this audience is most responsive. So this is just part of what we have. It's also important to highlight that by connecting these data, we can replace many of these small ad hoc studies. I was talking before about we could add some extra questions to brand index, but maybe we didn't need to add that. Maybe we can just add it later, or we can also be more specific on the ad hoc studies that we actually want to start up and ask more questions about, and save money and time associated with these studies. So let's look more into this next, where we go to the next part of our category, the templated tracking services that we have. So we will look into a bit more on how you can add on to your daily tracker on specific topics. Templated tracking services linked to the cube are much more focused and adding on why questions to interpret the syndicated data, but on specific topics. We're basing the templated trackers on brand health metrics, but what we're doing at the same time is that we're layering on data. So on top of profiles and brand index, we're layering on custom or syndicated product data. The concept is that we take a specific target group. It could be current customers, for instance, of a brand, and we ask them very focused questions. You could say we piggyback on brand index, because what effectively happens is that within 24 hours of the brand index responded doing a brand index survey, we recontact them, and this is a very efficient and scalable way of tracking the brand index data. And this is how the process overall is illustrated. We have the data from brand index, we recontact them, we base our business initiative on this, and then we go back into brand index and monitor the impact of the initiative that we did. So moving on from this, let's look into a specific example. You know, why is this useful? Why do we need to go deeper into specific issues and connect them to brand index? This is a French example. We have Amazon. They were also hit by the COVID crisis. And on April the 15th, they actually closed their warehouses. There were allegations before this happened that workers were not working under safe conditions. So trade unions, but also the French government was putting a lot of pressure on Amazon, and they in return responded by closing down the warehouses. On the other hand, they didn't stop delivering all their products. They just delivered from other warehouses in other countries. The warehouse has since opened, and you can see at the end of this timeline, end of May, you can see that it looks like recommendation is beginning to pick up. So I'm showing here 3 lines. I'm showing you the bus development, which is of course affected more. I'm showing the recommendation level in the population, and I'm showing you the recommendation level among the current customers. So what we're saying is that in essence, these events coincided with the same changes in brand index data, and therefore these events made those changes happen. So if we do the recontact and ask the questions that are related to the topic you're looking into, we can have an even more powerful case. And this is where I want to show you a bit more about one of our newest additions to the templated trackers, which is our product Recommend Plus. So what we saw before that the score is only slightly decreasing. We're seeing that it's stabilizing, but we also want to maintain that level. And this means that what we should do is that we should look into the Net Promoter Score, which is the overall indicator of brand health. And this is based on a standard questionnaire and reporting module. And the areas that are included in this surveys are areas of brand health. And these areas that we have selected here are areas that we know are important and strong predictors of high NPS scores. And this would help us understand what drives NPS and what drives recommend in brand index, essentially. The sample you will choose here is the current customers. So you are tracking the tracker, you are tracking what's happening in brand index. And we do that, let's say, for a period of a year to understand, what happens over time. And if we go to the next slide, I'll show you that the principle is that we ask the brand index questions, and afterwards we recontact the questionnaire, the current customers from the brand index questionnaire, and ask them the Recommend Plus questions. This is highly cost effective because it makes use of recontact, and it's a standard module, it's standard reporting, it's standard questions. You get a deeper understanding of what brand values are driving brand performance and Net Promoter Score. And when you also add profiles to it, we get a full view on behavioral, cultural, and personality factors that are also impacting recommendation. So this means you get a better understanding of the significance of the movements in the tracker. With this type of template tracker, you get more variables, more sample, more insights than on a standard tracker, and you don't change the underlying tracker. And that's kind of the basis of this. You add on to it, but you don't change it, which is also one of the important things about a tracker. So let's look at an example of how you could show or describe an Amazon promoter. This is a current customer of Amazon, and they will recommend Amazon to others. So they use the internet more. There are more mails. The annual household income is broad-spectred. Online shopping makes their life easier. They actually like loyalty programs. They are really into loyalty programs, and they would actually select brands that offer loyalty programs, which is also a good, important thing to know about for Amazon, that they really need to care about their clients. 18% use the Amazon Prime video regularly. So if you use Amazon, you also use other Amazon products. they own their own home, their internet connection is a very fast one, they're into trying new things within technology, and they use a lot of, they use primarily the desktop, but there are a lot of the internet, and that is also good to know. And all of this is scalable in the sense that this can be rolled out to other countries. We have the same systems and the same way of collecting in all countries. Brand Index is available in 44 countries now. Profiles is available in almost 20 countries right now. And we collect the same data across countries. So the scalability here comes from making a system that works in one country. It will always also work in the next countries, and then you can compare across countries. Finally, we have the case where the syndicated or the templated approach is not enough. It's not applicable in somewhere. This is where we go to our third way of looking at tracking, how we can connect your fully customized tracker to our data. So looking into a specific business challenge that we've come across with the client is that we have this, the example is a major media conglomerate. They have products across all media channels, and they need a broad-spectred tracker that covers all of their products. So this information is highly valued, and it cannot be traded off for a generalized syndicated tracker. Also, the questionnaire length is limited. It's already 20 minutes, but we still need more depth. So how do we build more insight around that tracker? Moving on, what we would do is we would create the custom tracker. We will track the data that's needed there. We will add this to our profiles data, to our cube, and we can align this across countries as well. So it's not only syndicated data that can be used across countries, it's also the custom approach. And this is still scalable because we have data available already. So we don't need to increase the custom tracker questionnaire. We can append data that we already have to get more depth. So then for the next and final slide is just an example to show you how we try to integrate data. We track the data from the custom survey. We append the standard demographics. That was actually what was happening before, but now we can also add even more data from other categories, from behavioral and attitudinal areas of our data to understand what's happening in the custom tracker. So essentially the same process as with our syndicated trackers. So I hope that we, through these examples, have shed some light on how different tracker approaches from off-the-shelf syndicated to the highly customized option can be flexible, scalable, and connected in that sense.
Fantastic. Thank you very much to Anne and Bianca. I think, and I hope, what we have demonstrated, not only delivering the COVID insights, but also through the framework that Anne has described, is just how the YouGov connected data can really add value. Because right now, at this moment in time, with all that is going on in the world, the tracking has never been more important. It's never been more important to have something that delivers outstanding value for money, that allows you to be incredibly flexible, that allows you to gain scale, but more importantly, what I hope that we've managed to surface here is when you have that tracking data that shows a metric climbing or falling, you're able to answer the why and who and how you can address that through one data system. Right. what I would like to go on to now is answer your questions. So, if there is a chat function, and please do put your questions in there. While they've been coming in, Bianca, you've had a look at them. Is there anything in particular that you want to pick out?
Yes, there's one which I think I'll give to you, Will, which is basically, you know, we've seen some of these examples of brands that have performed poorly over the COVID pandemic. And are there any examples from your connected data brands that have performed well?
Oh, great question. And the answer to that is yes. We've seen examples from brands around the world that have both got it wrong in the case of Adidas, but we have seen examples. I'm going to pick out two brands in particular. Actually, both in insurance, not necessarily the most exciting of categories, one might argue, but examples of brands in the US and the UK that have actually got it right. And I'm going to talk about State Farm Insurance and Admiral. Both of those organizations have very publicly come out, and rather than with a message around we're all in this together, these are unprecedented times, we're here to help you, rather than just putting out messages of solidarity, they've actually taken action. And they've taken relatively small actions as on an individual, so make only a little difference to individuals, but all of those little actions stack up. So, for example, Admiral has come out with a very public message and said, "We are an insurer. With lockdown, there are less people on the road. With less people on the road, there are less accidents. With less accidents, there are less insurance claims. We are therefore making more money. As an organization, we would like to share that excess profit with our customers and have offered a refund." What they have actually seen as a result of that is their buzz increasing, their impression increasing, their reputation increasing, their customer satisfaction increasing, and their consideration. The total bill they estimated was about £110 million, which is a fraction of the profit that they've made, but resharing that with their customer base, which has made a massive difference. And what will be really interesting is to see how that converts into increased sales and renewals as policies come to the end of their life. So there's one example. Another example of a brand that has come out with a completely different campaign would be one like KFC. Under lockdown, of course, fans of the fast food giant have been attempting to recreate their favorite KFC meals at home. They've been posting them on social media. Mother, the advertising agency for KFC, has created a compilation of people's efforts at home. They put them into a beautiful TV program, but it was a bit tongue-in-cheek to say that, and the big message was, we realize that you've been suffering under lockdown. We appreciate the love for your brand. Your efforts aren't quite to our standard. We're reopening. We'll take it from here. And the reaction to that type of ad, injecting a little bit of humor, appreciating people's pain and communicating with authenticity, has again seen a great improvement in brand scores.
Great. No, thanks, Will. And there's another question, and I think, Anne, I'll put this forward to you about the footprint of our connected data. So in which markets do we have the functionality to do deep dives? So I'll put that to you, Anne.
Yeah, thanks. Well, we have it across the European countries, UK, the Nordics, Germany, France, Spain, Italy, but it's also available in the US. It's available in APAC, including Australia. So we're covering more than well, we're covering 44 countries at least, with a brand index and around 20 with profiles.
Excellent, thanks Anne. And there's another question here. I will put this forward to you, Will. Is it possible to make a conclusion when the global travel comes back? Good question.
It's a great question. I wish I had a crystal ball and was able to predict with utter certainty about when that might be the case. We can see from our global tracking, and in brand index, we ask, are you in market to book a flight or book travel and accommodation? Travel and accommodation, we look at a window of the next 6 months. Flights, we look at a window of the next 12 months. What we have seen across almost all markets since January is naturally a steady decline in people that are claiming to be in market. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. Not only from an example taken from on Australian data, where they have started to, and they had, because their exit strategy started slightly ahead of other people, what we have seen is a first glimmer of that in-market for flights start to lift. That's an encouraging sign. What we have also been looking at, and in some markets, is the degree with which people would feel comfortable booking things and what measures organizations or flights will have to put in place. So, for example, we ran a really interesting piece in the US looking at what would you expect to see on flights? Would you expect to see offered PPE? Would you expect the middle seats to be empty? Would you expect temperature checks before getting on board a flight, or having to provide some form of medical passport or antibody test before you would actually get on? All of those things do make people feel more comfortable, but ultimately, this is going to come down to restrictions. As you can see from our data, the Swedes, or the majority of Swedish people, look as though they can't wait to book a holiday. The next country after that is the UK. You know, lots of cue the jokes about our really poor weather. But this is going to come down to government restrictions. There's a lot of talk at the moment about quarantine, whether that is on arrival or on repatriation. So I think it's a very long answer to a short question, but I think it's safe to say watch this space, and I can send you, as a result of this, what our in-market data looks like for flights, travel and accommodation, and how that's trending over time.
Great. No, thanks, Will. Thank you very much. I think we have sort of answered some of the questions that have popped up. Of course, people have also been asked about the slides, so of course they will be available, as Will was saying in the beginning, and the recordings as well. So I think I'll hand it back to you, Will, to
Sure, fantastic. Thank you very much, Bianca. If there are any further questions that you have, you finished this call, or any further feedback that you have, please send us an email at info@yougov.com, or of course get in touch with your local account manager. So beyond that, I think it just is left to me to say thank you very much for attending today's webinar. Thank you very much to both Anne and Bianca, and we hope you have a wonderful and safe day. Many thanks and good afternoon.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.